Welcome to Italian Innovators. I'm Luca Cottini, and today I'm in the company of Gianfranco Zaccai, visionary designer and architect, founder and chief design officer at the firm Continuum, now EPAM Continuum, founder and president of the Foundation for Augmented Intelligence, and innovative creator of category-defining products like the Reebok Pump, the P&G's Swiffer, and the Omnipad. Gianfranco holds degrees in industrial design from Syracuse University and architecture from the Boston Architectural College, from which he also received an honorary degree. In 2007, he was awarded an honorary arts degree from North Carolina State University, and in 2009, an honorary fine arts degree from Syracuse. He is an advocate and true champion of design thinking as a holistic and integrated approach to innovation, research, and development. Thank you very much, Gianfranco, for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
So today we'll discuss design as a language, a process, and a comprehensive way to think objects and products in relation not just to their use or external surface, but also and above all to their performative presence, their meaning, and their ability to detect and give plastic form to our needs and wants. I want to start from your story. You were born in Trieste, a melting pot of cultures and a lively crossroads of Italian, German, and Slavic influences. And you received your college education in the United States at Syracuse University. Now, in your professional life, you kept living in between worlds, alternating your time between Italy and Boston. And I recently read on the web a piece of yours that compared Boston and Pisa as sister cities, sharing a common history of innovation, a river flowing in the urban space, a healthcare hub, and a population of tourists and students. It seems like this constant mirroring of words is an integral part of your work. How do you combine American and Italian cultures in your own experience and in your own design?
First of all, let me say that I was born in Trieste, coincidentally, because my family is actually from Istria. So they actually fled Istria, and I was born a few months after they were able to flee with their lives. So actually, we're Istrian, and as a result, our connection to the Veneto and Venice is very strong because we would speak the same dialect at home. And then my family came to the United States when I was young. Went to the university at Syracuse, as you mentioned. But the connection with Italy was very, very strong for various reasons, because I think people who are refugees are particularly connected to their roots. And so I was very pleased when I finished my training at Syracuse University, which actually I found to be a very wonderful place to study because it was very much influenced by the Bauhaus. So there's a German component there as well. When I finished my courses there, which was very interdisciplinary and very much based on trying to understand things by doing our own research, I was pleased to have a job in a medical company, because when I graduated design, I thought that even though I was offered jobs at General Motors and companies like General Motors, I wanted to work in virgin territory. And it seems to me that medical devices, medical products at the time had very little or no design input. And for me, what design is and is not about just the shape of something or the aesthetics of something, but it's about the experience of something. So I worked for a company that was looking for an Italian-speaking industrial designer to be responsible for their location in Milan. And as it turns out, they also had offices and development centers in Germany and in Israel. So I would travel between these various countries, although I would spend about a month in Italy and a month in the United States, back and forth for many years. And in this experience, I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about the strengths of different approaches and also the weaknesses of different approaches. I discovered that in the Italian approach to design, the emotional component is very, very important. But there's also an analytical component, which was particularly strong in the US, which I also decided to adopt, but also to better, because I discovered in this experience that there were a lot of problems, organizational problems within the company that I was working for. So I ended up actually learning a lot about organizational management, how to organize things so that true innovation and design could happen. That resulted in the creation of Continuum in 1983. The notion of Continuum was, first of all, motto was doing well by doing good. So we did not want to do anything that would harm people. We wanted to make people's lives better. And to make people's lives better, we needed to understand people deeply, not just do what we were asked to do in a brief that we would receive from marketing or the president of a company, but actually delve into people's lives. And then to turn those insights that were gathered into reality, we needed to have many different capabilities. So I asked a friend of mine who was a physicist and an engineer to join us so we could actually not only identify opportunities, but also develop them no matter what the technology involved would be. And that grew into Continuum. For many years, we were always proposing projects with what we call the phase zero. The phase zero was about stepping back and questioning what we were asked to do, rather than doing what we were asked to do. We did that, in fact, with Reebok, and that resulted in the creation of the Pump shoe, which was really informed by realizing that a player for the Boston Celtics at that year had lost an entire season because of a twisted ankle, and also realizing that the market for athletic shoes were not professional basketball players, but they were young children and teenagers. And young children and teenagers have feet that grow, and their parents buy shoes, and then within a few months, the shoes are too tight, so they have to buy new pairs. So we had this idea of an inflatable shoe that would provide a little extra weight, would provide custom fit, so the shoes could be worn longer, but they would always fit perfectly. And they would provide support at the ankle, which would reduce injuries. And that actually came from a project which I did at the university, which dealt with looking for inspiration in nature. And I looked at a cell in the leaves of trees and plants called the stoma, which opens and closes to relieve pressure inside the leaf and to release humidity inside the leaf. So in the case of dryness, it closes, it maintains the humidity within the leaf. If there's an overabundance of rain, it opens and it lets the leaf breathe. So this opening closing shape of the cell was the insight that I brought from 20 years before into the development of the Reebok shoe. And then because we had extensive capabilities, we not only developed the design and the idea, but we also developed the insert, and we made prototypes, and we traveled to Korea to put them in the shoes, and it was a huge success.
This is a fantastic story. Thank you for sharing this, and also your immigrant story, which is very similar to the story of another Istrian, Sergio Marchionne, who then immigrated to Toronto and became the CEO of Fiat. But what he calls the migrant's mindset, which I also share, is really this possibility of seeing the world from concomitant and different perspectives, which is also at the base of your approach, which we will talk about it later. Basically, the design thinking approach that really gathers the needs and wants of people from real experience and steps back from the execution and actually starts to question the problem and open up different avenues for research and innovative solutions. Now, in a recent interview, you compared design to food, indicating that a product must be like a great meal. It must have the right ingredients in the right quantity, served in the right, in the sense, perfect mixture of the functional, emotional, ecological, and economical. This is also something you mentioned in your previous comment. Now, in several presentations, I also had the chance to similarly discuss temperance as a distinctive Italian quality, as really the right balance of cultural and functional elements of nature and society, of identity and diversity. Dante would call it concinitas, singing together of voices. And of course, for an orchestra conductor, this is the experience of pleasure that happens in the harmony of timbres and instruments. But how do you achieve that balance in an object? And when do you know it as a creator?
Well, I can only tell you how I do it. First of all, I think that being an immigrant, but also being a refugee, I always look at everything from the outside in a sense, as well as the inside out, because I always have felt both a part of the society I'm in, but also apart from it. And so I have this way of just looking at the world and trying to understand what happens and what happens to people that are not like me, because no one is like me. And it's true of everyone, right? No one is like us. And what I realized was that very often designers and design were thinking that they were going to save the world by doing things that they thought was the ideal thing to do from their perspective. This is kind of the Bauhaus Bauhaus approach, right? The Bauhaus approach is that we will give you what is best for you because we know what purity is and what beauty is. But in reality, there's also a shortcoming, which is that somehow some of the Bauhaus work was certainly inspirational, but at the same time also lacking a certain soul, a certain emotional connection. And one of the things that is really wonderful about Italian culture is the notion of tradition and family and social connection. So when I talked about the meal, which I think was an interview done for one of my clients, Herman Miller, was to say that food really should be like design, or design should be like food, which is to say that there's a lot of fast food around, which is pretty terrible to the planet and terrible to your health. Well, I think there's a lot of fast design, which is terrible to the planet and terrible to your health. There are a lot of things that are designed to be appealing, to encourage people to buy them and then to throw them away. And I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. Someone who I respect very much and has become a friend is Dieter Rams, former head designer at Braun. And he wrote a book called Less But Better. And I think less but better ought to be the mantra of all designers in the future, and also of the people who employ them. That it's not about creating more and more stuff, but it's about creating more better experiences where the materiality of things is reduced or disappears sometimes, and the experience is enhanced. So a great meal is part of a great experience, and a great experience is the environment that you're in, the context that you're eating for, with, the people you're eating with, the way it's served, what it's served on, the amount of food and the ingredients, not too much and not too little, but just right. No waste at the end. That's my analogy.
And also less is better is the key to fashion. The Italian approach to fashion, which is a sophisticated simplicity, something that is able to express value with little, and also to give value to the ingredient and to the experience, as you said.
Missoni, another Istrian exile, actually he was from Dalmatia, but anyway, is a perfect example of that, right? It's always this combination of colors and forms in fairly simple shapes, but always new and always fresh.
Absolutely. And to give the element its real value, its depth and its authenticity and genuineness, rather than working on more expensive and consuming combinations or ephemeral products. Now, we were mentioning earlier that you have been the creator of category-defining objects. We talked about the Reebok pump, but I want to mention here also the P&G Swiffer and the waterproof insulin pump Omnipod. My question is, like, how did you get to them? And how is a product born? How does it develop then? Where is originality born?
It's always the same process. The process is combining a small group of people that have different sensibilities and different trainings, because we all have areas where we are strong, relatively, and then areas where we're weak. We have things that we see that are not important to us and other things that are very important to us. With the Procter & Gamble Swiffer, we were simply asked to develop new products that were not extensions of their current brand. So they were not a stronger cleaner than Tide for your wash, but they were really new categories. And one of the things we looked at was cleaning in the home. So what we believe strongly in is not only talking to people to hear what they say, but actually looking at what they do. So we went into people's homes and we talked to lots of different people, and it seemed that having a clean house was important, but they didn't necessarily like doing it. And having a clean kitchen was particularly important because of sanitary issues. And so we observed people cleaning their kitchen, and they would fill a big mop of water. They would let the water run until it got hot. They would put a detergent in the pail, and then they would run the water until they got nice soapy water. And then they mopped the floor with a mop. And then they put the pail back in the sink, they emptied it, and then they spent a lot of time cleaning the mop, because the mop cleans by entrapping dirt. And we noticed a few interesting things. One was that they were spending more time cleaning the mop sometimes than cleaning the floor, number one. And number two, that when the floor was dry after mopping, there was a film on it. And when we looked at what was on the floor, typically on many floors, we discovered that most of it is just dust. And in fact, some of that dust is also human skin cells, because we fluff off skin cells all the time. And when you add water to dust, it turns into what I like to say mud. And so you may pick up that water, most of it, but what remains has this, what formerly floating dust on it, and it comes back down, it adheres to the floor. So it leaves a film. So our conclusion was we need to eliminate the dust. And to do that, the best way to do it was to eliminate the water and to eliminate the detergent or reduce it as much as possible, because people really hated cleaning them up because they hated to touch that dirty thing. So we prototyped some different approaches using basically electrostatic action to pick up dust from a floor, and we realized that it worked very, very well. And then occasionally there would be something that would be sticking to the floor. We designed this spray system where we could put a little bit of detergent where you needed it and then clean it, and then with two fingers, get rid of the pad, which is mostly paper. Very clean, very quick. Now, it's interesting that at the same time that we were looking at this phenomena, there were some chemists with us who looked at the same phenomena, and their conclusion was that instead of getting rid of the water and the detergent, they needed to develop an even better detergent that would not leave a film. Perspective and bias gives you sometimes the wrong result. So anyway, we were able to demonstrate that this idea really was extremely valuable and doable, and Procter & Gamble invested a lot of time and money to develop the manufacturing automated process to make the little sheets of Swiffer. And then they launched the product, and it was the biggest success story in the history of Procter & Gamble, with billions of dollars of income. My point here is that this is a good example of a good meal. It's about doing something that makes people's lives better, generates profit and revenue for the producer. And from my point of view, it reduces the amount of water and energy to heat the water and detergent that goes into the waste stream.
And this is also an example of what profit is, as both a monetary value, but also something that has a social, cultural, and individual impact for both the consumer and the designer in terms of the satisfaction of creating something that is responding to a need.
That's right. This very ethical notion of profit, I think, is a hallmark of a good producer, of a good corporation, a good whether it's a small company or a large company, to have a value proposition, which is not just about making money, but making people's lives better, and as a result, generating revenue.
Absolutely. And the word capital or the word value have a monetary component, but they also have like this cultural element, cultural value, cultural capital. Now, when you were talking about the Swiffer, I had in mind the example of Wilbur and Orville Wright, who had a bicycle store in Dayton, Ohio, and who were able to be the first in flight in Kitty Hawk against the backdrop of a number of scientists who were observing the problem of flight from only one perspective and couldn't believe or accept that the Wright brothers, who thought about it holistically, actually managed to set an airplane in flight. So in this sense, the holistic approach as a real omnicomprehensive understanding of reality, and including the human aspect. Now, design is also a coded language where objects are not simply decorative surfaces, but rather the story, the embodiment of a concept, or they're even characters. And the archetype of the Italian designer is actually Geppetto, father of Pinocchio, able to listen to the thin voice of matter and give his puppet or a piece of wood endless livelihood. Now, a designer similarly aspires to create objects that speak, that remain fresh, and establish a dynamic continuity between the material and the spiritual world. How does an object become a continuum, to borrow the name of the firm? And how does a product move from a logic of mere use and become instead a web of meaningful interactions?
It really starts with that discovery process, right? And the discovery is not only discovery of problems, but also the discovery of aspirations, discovery of ways to connect with people emotionally, visually, tactily, really through all the senses. A good example of that is the work that's been done in the past for Herman Miller, and that we did for Herman Miller. It ranged everywhere from products for hospitals. So we designed a Compass, which is a modular hospital room that can be assembled and disassembled and changed, which was driven by understanding that healthcare is constantly moving and changing, and to have things that can't be changed counterproductive, but also that when people are in a hospital, they need to feel that they're going to get better, that a sterile environment is not conducive to healing. That an environment which is welcoming to visitors and welcoming to medical staff reflects the fact that they are important, is also really important. At the same time, things that shouldn't even be seen. So, for example, we went to great extent to make sure that these modules were extremely cleanable and that water or liquids couldn't wick into the surfaces or at connection points of the surfaces. Because, and this was before COVID, we kind of anticipated the fact that cleaning it needed to be done really, really well, and that we needed to do everything possible to reduce contamination. We designed a chair also for hospital use, which actually people have in their own homes now. I have it here because it's really a very comfortable chair and a very attractive chair, I think. But it's really designed to help people become mobile, to get out of bed and go to a chair that then welcomes them, because it's the physical manifestation of what a nurse does to help people get into a chair. Their seat actually raises up slightly, so you're not sitting down as far, and the back comes forward to meet you. And then when you lean back through simple levers, the chair back goes into a semi-reclined position and the seat goes down. So that's a very comfortable position to stay in or watch television or read or take a nap. It all deals with collaboration and how to foster innovation and collaboration in an organization by applying what we learned as Continuum and turning that into a suite of elements and components that would allow people to interact, put ideas down, whether they're physically present one-on-one or one-to-many or one working alone or one working remotely. And that was done, quite a few years before COVID.
Well, that is remarkable. And actually, you use the word important when you define the objects. Important comes from the Latin verb importare, which is also in Italian, the verb for to matter, to mean something. Mm-hmm. An object that is important is an object that means something. And you describe very well the ramifications of this meaningfulness, significance of the object.
If I can add something about the Omni pump, because, you talked about the importance of the form, and sometimes the importance of the form of something is about making it disappear. So the driving force behind the development of Omnipod was to allow children with type 2 diabetes to be able to have dispensing of what they needed to survive in a way that would not be visible to other children, so they would not be made fun of, and so that exterior lines could not get snagged on something and be pulled out and an infection would occur. But the delivery of insulin is done through a little tiny, it's about this big, pod, which is attached to a skin underneath people's clothes, and then it automatically inserts a cannula and dispenses very accurately insulin over 3 days, and then it can be removed and disposed of and another one put on. So that when that first went to the market in India, I received an email from a 14-year-old girl who had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes maybe 8 months before, and she said, thank you. Now diabetes is not a big part of my life.
And this is also the key for storytelling, in a way, where many authors talk about the secret of storytelling, identifying it in the art of subtracting. Not seeing is the form of making something more relevant. The dynamics we described and we talked about, where really the design of an object becomes the design of an experience, or these qualitative interactions, is commonly known as design thinking, which is a relentless pursuit of a human-centered and holistic approach to innovation and product development. It's also a way to capture and understand people's needs and wants. Now, Steve Jobs, of course, was a pioneer of design thinking as a multidisciplinary convergence of different perspectives, as a philosophy of innovation, and as a method for listening and anticipating what people cannot articulate. So why is design thinking a more suited path to innovation than managerial thinking? And why does storytelling, philosophy, or art add to a product?
I think we've gone through different eras. So there was the era of technology. And technology, when someone is starving, anything you can give them to eat is welcome. And we were technologically starving. So for much of the 20th century, technology was the driving force: railroad, aviation, and so forth. And then came marketing and market research. And market research is about discovering what people want and need. But I think the discovery was also along the way that focus groups were not necessarily the best way to understand what people need, because people can't really voice or describe something that they don't know. So in a focus group, and we learned this many times over, in a focus group, people will often say that they want something very much like what they know, only slightly different. And not only that, but in a focus group, an innovative idea will often test badly because people believe it to be impossible. So I would say that, you talked about Steve Jobs, that's certainly a great example, but I would also say that Elon Musk and the Tesla is an example of someone not necessarily listening to focus groups, because no one would have said they wanted an electric car. None of the experts say that he could possibly succeed to revolutionize an industry so dominated by big players like the automotive industry, and so rooted on internal combustion engines with an electric car, was seen as folly. And yet it's now the most successful company in the industry. And I have one, and I must say that I get up in the morning, my car is fully charged, I never stop at a gas station, and I'm very pleased that I'm not using any petroleum product that may come from Russia. And I am not polluting the environment so much. I think that in a sense, the real innovators, whether they were designers or not, were using something called design thinking without knowing it. And design thinking is really about valuing that which people cannot express. It's about looking at things in 360 degrees, not simply projecting the past into the future, but also being informed by reality, right? By technology and what is possible, what is not possible. A big component of design thinking is, again, not just having crazy ideas, because if you just do that, you could have some pretty crazy ideas, but it's also understanding issues by delving deeply into the lives of people that are not like yourself. I think that we have to be careful, because there are a lot of people in organizations now talking about design thinking, but sometimes I feel that they're only applying a slogan to say that they're doing it, but they don't really know how to do it. Design thinking is about holistic thinking. Holistic thinking means understanding the rational, the quantifiable, but valuing the emotional, valuing the sensory, valuing traditions, valuing aspirations, and then putting all of those things together to come up with the right idea. And when you know that right idea is right, it's like, I think Newton said, is when the apple falls from the tree and hits you on the head. There's something called elegance. And I think an elegant solution is not a pretty solution. An elegant solution is the right solution. I mean, in nature, there are lots of things that are not pretty, but they're very elegant. I don't like snakes, but they're very elegant. A bat is not beautiful, but it's very elegant. So I think we're looking for, the true meaning of elegance. If you find what is truly elegant, other people will appreciate it, but you need to have partners in the process. So some of the great design that happened in Italy over the years was the result of a partnership between a designer or multiple designers and an entrepreneur, whether it was Olivetti or Artemide or whatever. I could certainly say that Apple was the result of the partnership between Jobs and Wozniak, and at one time Frog, and then later other designers, including Johnny Ives. So that kind of partnership is essential, because we as designers only have a lever which is so long. We need to have someone who can extend that lever to make something happen. And then we also need to have great partners on the technology front, because really elegant, simple ideas can be very difficult to execute. And they require engineers and scientists that are not looking for the simplest solution, but sometimes are looking for the most elegant solution. And the most elegant solution may require a lot more engineering work, a lot more software, a lot more dematerialization of the solution. So I think it's this rich mix of people that can really collaborate. A designer who can help to see opportunities, who can learn from others, who can collaborate with others in the process, who can translate some of their ideas into reality. And in that sense, it's very much a team sport.
And you also describe with design thinking the nature of the university as it should be. Universitas means to turn into one, but like the turning of multiple perspective into one object,
right.
Reality, and really translating that object in its multiple facets into an elegant idea. I think elegance would be an interesting concept to work on for current academia, how to deliver elegant solutions.
This is a great moment for me to veer off in the direction of my foundation. Universities very often are a collection of silos that, unfortunately, unlike what you just described as the origin of the concept, really put people in different silos and encourage them not to interact with each other very much, other than socially. And a lot of that is driven by economics, because the tuition is collected by one faculty versus the other. And anyway, I won't get into that. When I left Continuum, which is 4 years ago, I finally had the means to take some funds, which before were always invested in growing Continuum, into creating my foundation. And my foundation was really based on the realization that for many of my professional years, we were looking at people as if they were all of average intelligence and above, because also that's the way businesses look at market. And having the fortune of having neurodiverse children, especially one that has a more severe form of neurodiversity, and also through her friends and through all the years in her education and now as an adult, realizing that society as a whole, in all disciplines in society, have kind of neglected neurodiversity. And neurodiversity ranges from people like Elon Musk, who's neurodiverse, to people who are profoundly autistic and need to have people accompany them all the time. And this is a very significant portion of humanity. And not only that, but with artificial intelligence, robotics, and so forth, many jobs that were able to be done by someone with relatively low level of intelligence and low education are disappearing because they're being automated. So I think that we as a society, I think we as designers, as engineers, as innovators in general, need to look at neurodiversity as the next frontier for innovation, and for profitable innovation, actually, because it's a huge problem that has lots of need, not only for people that are neurodiverse, but for their families who have to think about their future when they're no longer present. And their future doesn't just mean financial support, but also emotional support, quality of life. I was pleased to discover that Syracuse University, my alma mater, besides having the design program that I went through, also has a program which I think it pioneered in the United States called Inclusive U. And Inclusive U allows people that have a low measurable IQ to have a university experience. They may not necessarily get a degree, but they get a certificate and they can have 4-year experience taking courses, socializing with other people that are neurotypical, and having a full life. I funded a course called Intelligence Plus Plus. The name of the course, Intelligence Plus Plus, is because intelligence has two meanings, at least in English. One is the kind of intelligence which is done by the CIA. You discover something. Yeah. So part of Intelligence Plus Plus is to encourage students to go out and discover needs and wants and aspirations of neurodiversity. The second one is looking for ways to augment the native intelligence that people may have, not to create charitable organizations to provide things that they can do during the day, but ways that people can navigate a world which is maybe difficult for them to navigate through innovation, simple or complex. Could be innovations that have mostly a technology component, some that may have a fashion component, and some that may have a policy or a support system component. So we just finished our second year and we awarded prizes to 3 of the top entries, because at the end it's a 2-semester interdisciplinary project where people from different faculties, so an attempt of breaking down the silos and having people collaborate. And so we awarded a small amount of money to 3 of the top winners to encourage them to develop their ideas further and maybe commercialize them. But I think that this is an opportunity not just for the little that I can do in this exercise, but for many other people to join in. I'll give you a statistic which is eye-opening for me. An organization called Autism Speaks did a financial analysis of the cost of autism alone to the United States on a yearly basis. So this is the cost to individuals, to families, to school systems, to local towns, to states, to the federal government, to society in general. And the number was amazing. It's $231 billion. Now, if you add other forms of neurodiversity, you can easily double that number. And that's only the United States. You add the rest of the world, and you can see that it costs tremendous amounts of money. So innovations that can improve the quality of life and reduce the cost should generate revenue. There's opportunity there for people to do well by doing good. And have students look at this as being an opportunity for them to do good that goes beyond creating the next social network or the next video game.
And I think this foundation that you founded in 2018, the Foundation for Augmented Intelligence, is not only a good example of the social impact of design, but really an application of design itself as a way to create an experience, to create a form of social, cultural, intellectual, individual betterment, also economic, as you pointed out. I think this brings our conversation from the design of an object to the design of its surroundings, to the design of an experience, to the design of a model of a society.
Let me add something else to this discussion, because as a result of the experience with our daughter and with her friends and their friends' families, knowing that the students that are in Inclusive U at Syracuse University, we discovered that there's one thing that they really lack, which is the ability to do a semester abroad. So they ask why their friends or their siblings can go to Florence, for example, and have a semester at Syracuse University in Florence, but they can't. So we thought, well, this is an opportunity for us to create a learning experience for the people who are neurodiverse and for their families, but also for people who are neurotypical but are studying special ed or psychology, to come to Italy and to have a semester or two in an environment where they can learn by doing, where they can interact with each other, where they can have an experience which has really transformed our daughter and had her grow intellectually, I must say, incredibly, because of these social connections. So we acquired a historic property in Tuscany, in Castelfiorentino. So it was actually the location of the first agricultural college in Italy in 1831, founded by Cosimo Ridolfi. So we have his archive. We are required to guard it and maintain it by the Italian state, but it's accessible to researchers to come. And we also have 100 hectares of the original farm estate and the villa and other buildings. And so our intention is to renovate the villa, and we already have agriturismi, which are available, that are already being rented, and the villa will be a very high-level hotel. And then outside of the villa, there will be another small hotel with a farm-to-table restaurant. And we have a church where Ridolfi is buried. We are producing grapes, herbs, and all kinds of things. But the whole idea is to have people come, have a semester, be with their friends, be with people that are learning to become better educators in the future, and to work in different environments and to learn about agriculture, to learn about animals, to learn about serving people in a hotel, to have an experience that increases their ability to be independent, increases their sense of self-worth, and provide maybe a stepping stone and a kind of a petri dish to learn and prototype and test innovation.
This is also what you describe, the experience of study abroad for college students, the ability to be placed in a completely different environment and making sense of it, or cultivating a different soil and making sense of it, which has both a social component and an individual point of growth, as you described. Thank you for this really, really wonderful and enriching conversation. We explored design as a creative process, as a method to pursue innovation, and as a coded language, as a philosophy of experience in a way. We examined the genesis and path of creativity in between cultures, so Italy and the United States, and in between worlds, so between the world of culture, society, and the world of business. And we also explored the connection between design and healthcare and education. Grazie mille, Gianfranco, for your time and your wonderful insights.
È stato un piacere.
And thanks everybody for watching. If you like this video, I invite you to subscribe to this channel or to the newsletter on the webpage of the show at www.italianinnovators.com to receive notifications of new episodes and know more about this project. You can also follow me on my LinkedIn profile or on Instagram at Italian Innovators for updates, news, and additional materials. Thanks for your support. Arrivederci e alla prossima.